Dale Matthews lifted his champagne glass while the entire country club ballroom laughed at his joke. My wife, Selma, is proof that being pretty and sweet still works in America, he said with a smug grin. She has no idea what any of us do in business. And honestly, I like it that way. More laughter. Selma smiled softly from the end of the table while his mistress sat 3 seats away pretending to be a consultant. Nobody noticed Selma's fingers tighten around the leather folder hidden beneath her chair. Because while Dale was busy humiliating her in public, Selma already knew about the affair. The stolen money, the fake companies, and the divorce papers he planned to hand her after the acquisition closed. What Dale didn't know, she had spent the last 3 years making sure he believed she was too dumb to notice. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or made to feel small by someone who needed your silence to feel powerful, stay with this story. Because sometimes the quietest woman in the room is the one holding the match. The Matthews estate looked like something pulled out of a luxury magazine. White stone exterior, black framed windows, perfect hedges trimmed every Thursday morning, a circular driveway that wrapped around a fountain. Dale insisted on importing from Italy because people with real money appreciated details. Selma used to laugh when he said things like that. Now she just nodded. Every morning she woke before sunrise and moved through the house like a ghost no one noticed anymore. She checked the florist deliveries, answered calls from charity organizers, reviewed menus with the chef before Dale's networking dinners, sent handwritten thank you cards to people who barely remembered her name. The invisible labor of being a wealthy man's wife. Beautiful, quiet, useful. Dale liked useful. By 8:30 that morning, Selma stood in the massive kitchen wearing cream-colored cashmere while the espresso machine hummed softly beside her. Rain slid down the oversized windows overlooking the backyard. Dale entered without looking at her. "Where's my blue folder?" She glanced up from her tablet. "On the dining table. You left it there after your call with Chicago." "Hmm. No thank you. No eye contact. Just expectation." He grabbed the folder and started scanning papers while drinking the coffee she had already prepared exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars. Tiny splash of cream. The silence between them used to feel comfortable. Now it felt embalmed. "You're still coming Friday, right?" Selma asked carefully. "Margaret said the entire family will be there." Dale sighed immediately, irritated by her voice, before she had even finished the sentence. "Selma, it's a business dinner. Don't make it into a thing." "I wasn't making it into a thing. You know what I mean." There it was. The tone. The subtle condescension polished smooth after years of practice. Like she was difficult for asking basic questions about her own life. Selma lowered her eyes and nodded softly. Dale relaxed instantly when she did that. When she became smaller, easier, manageable. He walked toward her, adjusted the sleeve of her sweater absently, then kissed the top of her head like someone rewarding a well-trained dog. "You worry too much," he said. "That's why I handle things." Selma smiled. The same smile she'd perfected years ago. Warm enough to comfort him, empty enough to protect herself. After he left, the house became painfully quiet. She stared at the rain outside for a long moment before walking upstairs toward the east wing of the house. Her slippers sank into the cream carpet as she entered the room Dale called his home office. The room smelled like leather and cedarwood. Expensive, controlled, cold. Selma closed the door behind her gently. 3 years ago, entering this office would have made her nervous. Dale hated when people touched his things, especially her. Now she knew exactly where everything was. She moved calmly toward the desk and opened the second drawer beneath the filing cabinet. Her fingers slid beneath a stack of acquisition reports until she found the black notebook hidden underneath. Not his notebook. Hers. Or at least pieces of it. Selma sat slowly in his chair. The pages inside were filled with strategic frameworks for corporate expansion, market behavior analysis, acquisition sequencing, risk management structures. Her words, her ideas, her handwriting from years ago converted into typed executive summaries under Dale's company logo. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, not because she was surprised anymore, but because every discovery still hurt like the first cut. Back when they were newly married, Selma used to help Dale brainstorm at night. They would sit on the apartment floor eating Chinese takeout while he talked about wanting to build something meaningful. "You're the smartest person I know," he used to tell her. And she believed him. She believed all of it. The late night conversations, the promises, the dreams. She didn't notice when the brainstorming slowly became unpaid labor. Didn't notice when Dale started presenting her ideas in meetings without mentioning her name. Didn't notice when her role quietly shifted from partner to support system, then eventually from support system to ornament. Selma closed the notebook carefully. Her chest felt tight. She stood and walked toward the bookshelf near the window, pretending she wasn't shaking. Family photos lined the shelves, vacation photos in Aspen, charity galas, anniversary dinners, smiling pictures of a marriage that had been dying slowly in private. In every photo, Dale stood tall and confident, and Selma stood beside him, looking softer every year, smaller every year. There was one picture from nearly a decade ago that stopped her cold. A fundraiser in Manhattan, before the house, before the country club memberships, before she quit finance. Selma barely recognized herself. Her posture had been different back then, confident, sharp-eyed, alive. She remembered the woman in that photo. Wall Street had once terrified and thrilled her equally. She'd graduated near the top of her class at Columbia. Professors used to tell her she had instincts people spent decades trying to develop. Then she met Dale Matthews. Charismatic, ambitious, magnetic. He made her feel chosen. At first, he loved how intelligent she was, until her intelligence stopped serving his ego and started competing with it. "Why work 80 hours a week when you don't have to?" he'd asked one night years ago. "You're exhausted all the time. You deserve peace. We're building a family now, and eventually I'll take care of everything." It sounded romantic then. Now she understood it differently. Control always sounded gentlest at the beginning. A notification suddenly lit up across Dale's laptop screen. Selma froze. The laptop sat partially open on the desk behind her. Dale normally guarded it obsessively, but he'd left in a rush this morning. Another notification appeared. "Vanessa last night was worth the wait. Already miss you." Selma stared at the words without moving. Her stomach twisted violently, but not from heartbreak anymore. That part had already burned itself out months ago. What remained now was colder, sharper. She walked slowly back toward the desk. Another message appeared. Vanessa. Did she suspect anything after the dinner? A pause. Then Dale's response. "Dale Selma, please." She notices flower arrangements, not financial strategy. Selma read the sentence twice, then once more. A strange calm settled over her face. Not tears, not rage. Something worse. Acceptance. Because the cruelest part wasn't the affair. It was the certainty behind his disrespect. Dale truly believed she was too foolish to understand the life happening around her. Too soft to fight back. Too dependent to leave. Selma slowly closed the laptop. Then she reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered briefly before pressing a contact she hadn't called in years. Rachel Bennett. The phone rang twice. Then a familiar voice answered. Selma looked out at the rain falling across the enormous empty house. And for the first time in years, her voice sounded steady. "I think," she said quietly, "I'm finally ready to stop pretending everything is fine." Rachel Bennett's law office sat 32 floors above Midtown Manhattan. Glass walls, steel accents, the kind of place built for people who build by the minute and destroyed lives professionally. Selma stood near the reception desk, clutching her coat tightly around herself while rainwater dripped softly from the hem. She suddenly felt painfully underdressed among the sharp suits and expensive confidence surrounding her. Not because she lacked elegance, because somewhere along the way she had forgotten how to occupy space like she belonged in rooms like this. The receptionist smiled politely. Ms. Bennett will see you now. Selma nodded and followed her down a long hallway lined with framed magazine covers and legal awards. Rachel looked almost exactly the same. Still tall, still striking, dark tailored suit, intelligent eyes sharp enough to cut through excuses before they were spoken. But the moment Rachel saw Selma standing in the doorway, something in her expression softened immediately. Oh, honey, that was all it took. Selma nearly broke apart right there. Rachel crossed the room quickly and hugged her tightly. Not delicately, not politely, like someone holding together a person who had been quietly collapsing for years. You look exhausted, Rachel murmured. Selma gave a weak laugh. That obvious? To me? Yes. Rachel pulled back and studied her face carefully. Sit down. The office overlooked the city skyline gray and blurred beneath the rain. Selma wrapped both hands around the coffee Rachel handed her, but didn't drink it. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Rachel leaned forward slightly. Start from the beginning. And Selma did. Not all at once. At first the words came carefully, controlled, like she still felt guilty speaking badly about her husband. She talked about Dale's affair, the dismissiveness, the manipulation, the way he spoke over her in public, the way every conversation somehow ended with her apologizing. Then slowly, the deeper truths emerged. The stolen business frameworks, the copied strategies, the shell companies, the hidden accounts. Rachel's expression darkened with every detail. By the time Selma showed her photos of the documents she had copied from Dale's office, Rachel was no longer looking at this like a troubled marriage. She was looking at it like a war. Jesus Christ, Rachel whispered. Selma stared down at her untouched coffee. I know how it sounds. No? Rachel shook her head immediately. I don't think you do. Selma looked up. Rachel's voice became very calm. This isn't just infidelity, Selma. This is financial fraud, intellectual property theft, asset concealment. She paused. Possibly coercive control. Selma frowned slightly at the phrase. Rachel noticed. That look right there? Rachel said softly. That's exactly why women stay trapped in situations like this. I'm not trapped. Rachel raised an eyebrow gently. Okay, Selma admitted quietly. Maybe a little. Rachel leaned back in her chair, studying her carefully. When was the last time you made a decision without considering how Dale would react? First, Selma opened her mouth, then stopped, because she genuinely didn't know. Rachel sighed softly. That's not love, Selma. The room fell quiet. Outside the windows, Manhattan blurred beneath sheets of rain and traffic lights. Selma stared down at her wedding ring. I used to think he made me feel safe, she admitted. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Control feels safe in the beginning, she finally said. That's why it works. Selma swallowed hard. The words landed somewhere deep, painfully deep. Rachel stood and walked toward the bookshelf behind her desk. She pulled out a thin folder and handed it over. Selma frowned. What's this? Your Columbia records? Selma blinked. What you think I didn't keep tabs on you after graduation? Rachel sat back down. You were one of the best financial minds in our program. Selma stared at the papers silently. Old academic recognitions, internship evaluations, recommendation letters. One note from a professor had yellowed slightly with age. Selma Matthews possesses unusually advanced strategic instincts, exceptional pattern recognition, executive-level analytical potential. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Rachel watched her carefully. You weren't mediocre before Dale, she said quietly. You didn't suddenly become unintelligent after marriage. Selma looked away quickly, because the truth was harder to admit than the betrayal itself. A part of her had started believing Dale. Not fully, but enough. Enough to become quieter. Enough to stop arguing. Enough to slowly disappear inside her own life. Rachel folded her hands together. Tell me something honestly. Selma nodded faintly. When was the last time Dale celebrated something about you that didn't somehow benefit him? Silence? Rachel gave a sad little smile. Exactly. Selma's chest felt unbearably tight now. I kept thinking if I loved him better, she whispered. Rachel's expression broke slightly. Oh, Selma, if I was easier, calmer, less intimidating. Her voice cracked. Maybe he wouldn't need to make me feel small all the time? Rachel leaned forward immediately. No. Her voice sharpened. Don't do that. Selma looked startled. You are not responsible for a man choosing cruelty to protect his ego. The words hit hard enough to leave bruises. Selma blinked rapidly, trying not to cry. Rachel softened again. He saw your brilliance early, she said gently. Men like Dale admire powerful women right up until they feel threatened by them. Selma wiped beneath one eye quickly. I don't even know who I am anymore. Rachel was quiet for a second. Then she said the one thing Selma wasn't prepared to hear. I think you do. Selma looked up slowly. I think you buried her, Rachel continued, but I don't think she's gone. For the first time in years, something flickered painfully inside Selma's chest. Not confidence, not yet, but maybe the memory of it. Rachel turned her laptop around on the desk. Now she said professionally, let's talk strategy. The screen displayed corporate acquisition documents connected to Dale's company. Rachel pointed towards several highlighted sections. This acquisition he's working on, she said. It's massive. If it closes successfully, Dale becomes almost untouchable financially. Selma's stomach dropped. And if it doesn't, Rachel looked directly at her. Then everything collapses. The room suddenly felt colder. Rachel continued scrolling through files. Here's the interesting part, she said. Your husband got sloppy. She pointed towards several timestamps and ownership transfers. These shell companies, they overlap with intellectual property filings tied to your old consulting work. She glanced at Selma. Meaning if we prove authorship and fraudulent concealment, he's exposed. Rachel nodded slowly. Very exposed. Selma stared at the screen silently. Fear crept up her spine. Not fear of Dale anymore. Fear of what happened next. Because blowing up a marriage was one thing, destroying an empire was another. Rachel seemed to read her thoughts instantly. If you move forward, she said quietly, your life changes permanently. Selma swallowed hard. He'll hate me. Rachel's expression turned unexpectedly cold. Selma, she said carefully, I think you're still grieving a version of Dale that never actually existed. That hurt the most. Because deep down, Selma knew she was right. Rachel closed the laptop gently. So I'm asking you now before this becomes real. The city lights flickered against the rain-streaked windows behind her. Rachel's voice lowered. If we do this, are you ready to destroy the life you spent 15 years building? Selma's fingers tightened around her wedding ring. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't know if she wanted to save her marriage anymore. Selma didn't answer Rachel's question right away. Because the terrifying part wasn't losing Dale, it was losing the version of herself that had spent 15 years surviving him. For so long, her identity had been built around maintaining peace, predicting moods, avoiding conflict before it started, making herself softer whenever Dale needed someone smaller to stand beside. If she stopped being that woman, who was left? Rain hammered softly against the taxi windows as Selma rode back to Connecticut that evening. Manhattan disappeared behind her in streaks of gray light, while Rachel's words kept replaying in her mind. You buried her. But I don't think she's gone. Selma stared at her reflection in the glass. She looked polished, elegant, expensive, and completely exhausted. When she arrived home, the estate glowed warmly against the darkening sky. The exterior lights illuminated every perfect detail of the house Dale loved showing off to guests. A monument to success, built partly from her mind and almost entirely from her silence. The moment she stepped inside, she heard laughter from the dining room. Dale and Vanessa. Selma froze briefly near the foyer. Vanessa wasn't supposed to be here. Then again, Dale had stopped caring about appearances months ago. He simply disguised disrespect as business. Selma slowly walked toward the dining room and found them sitting together at the long oak table covered in financial documents. Vanessa looked effortlessly beautiful in that polished Manhattan way, camel coat draped over her chair, blonde hair smooth and glossy, sharp eyes that always seemed to calculate the emotional temperature of a room before speaking. Dale glanced up casually. "Oh, good, you're home. Not how was your day, not you look tired, just acknowledgement," like she was staff returning for evening duties. Vanessa smiled politely. "Hi, Selma." Selma smiled back just as politely. "Vanessa." Dale returned his attention to the paperwork immediately. "We ordered food already. Hope that's okay." Of course they did. Selma removed her gloves carefully. "That's fine." Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "You should try the risotto." Dale said it's your favorite. The familiarity in the sentence scraped against Selma's skin, not because of jealousy, because of replacement. Vanessa spoke like someone already settling into another woman's life. Selma moved calmly toward the kitchen. Years ago, this scene would have shattered her emotionally. Now she observed it differently, like evidence. Dale and Vanessa continued discussing the acquisition openly while she poured herself sparkling water nearby. Neither lowered their voices. Neither considered her a threat. "Chicago's still hesitating," Vanessa said. "They want stronger projections before Friday." Dale scoffed. "They'll cave. You sound confident. I built this company from nothing." Selma nearly laughed at the sentence. Instead, she took a slow sip of water. Vanessa crossed one leg elegantly. "Still think we should move the assets before the acquisition finalizes. We are moving them. Not fast enough." Dale leaned back in his chair. "Relax. Selma would sign divorce papers with a sympathy card if I asked nicely." Both of them laughed softly. Selma stood perfectly still. Not reacting became its own kind of power after a while, because people revealed extraordinary things when they thought you were harmless. She walked into the dining room carrying her glass. Dale glanced at her distractedly. "Can you remind Cynthia to confirm the Hamptons reservation for June?" "Of course, and my mother wants you at dinner Friday by 6:30 sharp." Selma nodded gently. "I'll be ready." Vanessa gave her a small smile filled with fake warmth. "I honestly don't know how you keep everything organized." "I'd lose my mind." Selma met her eyes. "You'd be surprised what women can survive once they get used to being underestimated." Something flickered briefly across Vanessa's face, only for a second. Then it disappeared. Dale barely noticed the comment at all. That night, after Vanessa left, Selma sat alone in the enormous walk-in closet she once dreamed of owning. Luxury had become strange to her lately. Not comforting, just heavy. Rows of designer clothing surrounded her while she scrolled through copied financial files Rachel had secured onto an encrypted drive. Shell corporations, hidden transfers, real estate holdings under secondary entities. The deeper Selma looked, the uglier everything became. But one realization disturbed her most. Dale had not become manipulative recently. He had always been this way. Success had simply given him resources large enough to hide it better. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Selma quickly minimized the documents. Dale entered the closet, loosening his tie. "You're still awake?" "Couldn't sleep." He sighed dramatically while unbuttoning his shirt. "God, today was brutal." Selma watched him quietly. Once upon a time, she would have moved toward him automatically, rubbed his shoulders, comforted him, helped him carry emotions he never once helped her carry in return. Now she simply waited. Dale glanced over. "You okay?" There was mild annoyance beneath the question, like emotional maintenance was becoming inconvenient. Selma smiled faintly. "I'm fine." He studied her another second before nodding, satisfied enough. Then he sat beside her on the velvet bench near the mirror. You know, he exhaled slowly. After this acquisition closes, things are finally going to calm down. Selma almost admired how naturally lies came to him now. Really, yeah. He touched her knee absently. Maybe we spend more time in Aspen. Travel more. Travel more. Right before serving her divorce papers. The cruelty of it felt almost surreal. Selma tilted her head slightly. Are you happy, Dale? The question caught him off guard. What are you happy? He frowned faintly. Why are you asking me that? You just seem tired lately. He leaned back against the closet wall and rubbed his jaw. This is what success costs. No, Selma thought quietly. This is what pretending costs. But she only nodded sympathetically. Dale relaxed instantly again. God. It really was that easy. All she had to do was become smaller, and he felt powerful. The realization disgusted her now. He stood and kissed her forehead lightly before heading toward the bathroom. You worry too much, he said again. The same sentence, over and over, like a spell meant to keep her asleep. The moment the bathroom door shut, Selma's expression changed completely. The softness vanished. She opened her laptop again, then she began building folders. Carefully, methodically. Financial timelines, recorded conversations, property transfers, business proposals, every piece of evidence organized with terrifying precision. Hours passed. The house became silent around her. At nearly 2 in the morning, Selma finally leaned back in her chair and stared at the screen. She had forgotten this feeling. The focus, the clarity, the sharpness of her own mind. For years, Dale convinced her she was emotionally fragile, too sensitive, too overwhelmed. But now that fear was beginning to crack apart, something else emerged underneath it. Something colder, something capable. Her phone buzzed softly beside her. A text from Rachel. How are you holding up? Selma stared at the message for a long moment before replying. I think I finally understand something, Rachel responded almost immediately. What Selma looked toward the bathroom door, where Dale was humming casually to himself behind steam and warm light. Then she typed, Dale never wanted a partner. He wanted an audience. 3 dots appeared instantly as Rachel started typing back. But before the message came through, another notification appeared across Selma's screen. An internal calendar invite accidentally synced from Dale's company account. Private dinner, Vanessa Cole. Friday 8:30 p.m. celebration. After announcement, Selma stared at the words silently. Friday. The same night as Margaret's family dinner. The same night Dale had insisted she attend. The same night he planned to humiliate her publicly before celebrating privately with another woman. Something inside Selma finally hardened completely. Not heartbreak, not grief, decision. Friday night arrived dressed in wealth and cruelty. The private dining room at Blackstone Country Club glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, while waiters floated silently between tables, carrying wine bottles that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Everything about the room screamed old money trying not to brag, which in Selma's experience usually meant they were bragging constantly. She stood near the entrance, smoothing the sleeve of her dark emerald dress, while watching wealthy guests gather around Dale like planets orbiting the same sun. Investors, attorneys, executives, men who measured human value through leverage and acquisition. Women who smiled with perfectly whitened teeth while dissecting each other socially beneath polite conversation. Selma knew this world intimately, not because she belonged to it, because she had survived inside it. Selma darling. Margaret Matthews approached, carrying a champagne glass and judgment in equal measure. Dale's mother looked elegant in a sharp ivory suit with diamond earrings that glittered every time she tilted her head disapprovingly, which was often. You're late, Margaret said immediately. Selma blinked softly. It's 6:28. Margaret waved dismissively. Still, a hostess should arrive before guests. A hostess? Not family. Not daughter-in-law. Decoration. Selma smiled politely. I'll remember that. Margaret's eyes traveled over Selma carefully. At least you wore something flattering tonight. She leaned closer. That color almost makes you look confident. There was a time comments like that would have ruined Selma's entire evening. Now she simply noticed how desperately cruel people became when kindness made them uncomfortable. Thank you, Margaret, she said calmly. Margaret looked faintly dissatisfied by the lack of reaction. Before she could continue, Dale appeared beside them, adjusting his cufflinks. There you are. He kissed Selma's cheek automatically, without warmth. Clients from Chicago just arrived. Then his attention shifted immediately elsewhere. Mom, have you met Robert Ellison yet? He's handling the secondary valuation. And just like that, Selma disappeared from the conversation while standing directly beside them. It used to hurt every single time. Tonight, it simply clarified things. Across the room, Vanessa Cole laughed softly at something one of the investors said. She wore black silk tonight. Minimal jewelry, elegant enough to look expensive without trying too hard. Selma noticed the way Vanessa's hand briefly brushed Dale's wrist when he walked past her. Tiny, quick, intimate. People missed things when they didn't expect betrayal in beautiful rooms. Trevor Matthews arrived 20 minutes later, carrying rainwater on the shoulders of his coat and exhaustion beneath his eyes. Unlike Dale, Trevor never fully looked comfortable around wealth. He spotted Selma immediately and offered her a genuine smile. There's my favorite, Matthews. Margaret sighed dramatically. You say that every time just to irritate your brother, because it works every time. Trevor hugged Selma warmly before pulling back to study her face. You okay? The question was quiet enough that only she heard it. Selma nodded gently. I'm fine. Trevor looked unconvinced. Interesting. Maybe someone had noticed more than she realized. Dinner began shortly afterward. The long table overflowed with polished silverware candlelight and conversations carefully designed to sound casual while secretly establishing hierarchy. Selma sat halfway down the table beside Margaret, while Dale positioned Vanessa suspiciously close to himself near the center. Not close enough to invite scandal, just close enough to feed his ego. Wine flowed, conversations deepened, and slowly, as always, the humiliations began. Selma never cared much for business talk, Dale said at one point while discussing market volatility with investors. Honestly, she zones out after about 30 seconds. Soft laughter circled the table. Selma smiled lightly while cutting her salmon. One investor chuckled. Smart woman. Wish my wife ignored my work. Oh, Selma ignores conflict altogether, Margaret added dryly. It's practically a talent. More laughter. Trevor shifted uncomfortably. Dale grinned. That's because she's too sweet to assume the worst in people. Selma looked up slowly. The irony almost made her dizzy. Vanessa sipped wine carefully. That kind of trust is rare these days. Selma met her eyes across the candlelight. Yes, she said softly. Sometimes dangerously rare. For one brief second, Vanessa looked away first. Interesting. A waiter refilled glasses while conversation moved toward the acquisition again. Selma remained silent externally. Internally, she listened to everything. The Chicago investors were nervous. There were concerns about valuation inconsistencies, legal exposure, asset structures. Dale kept reassuring everyone with confident charm, while Vanessa strategically redirected conversations away from specifics. And suddenly, Selma saw it clearly. Vanessa wasn't just sleeping with Dale. She was helping protect him. Not emotionally, financially. The realization settled coldly into Selma's chest. She lowered her wine glass slowly, while the men continued talking over her as though she were furniture. You know what the real challenge is, Dale said, leaning back confidently. Keeping emotional people away from strategic decisions. A few men nodded knowingly. Margaret smirked openly. Selma's fingers tightened beneath the tablecloth. Not enough for anyone to notice, just enough for herself. One investor laughed. That's why you never let family near contracts. Vanessa smiled carefully. Especially trusting family. Then she said it. The sentence that changed the entire night. Well, technically, the ownership transfers worked perfectly once the spousal signatures were handled correctly. Silence, tiny, brief, but enough. Vanessa realized her mistake immediately. Dale's head snapped toward her. The investors kept eating, barely paying attention. But Selma noticed everything, especially the panic that flashed across Vanessa's face for less than half a second. Handled correctly. Not legally. Not transparently. Correctly. Dale recovered quickly. Too quickly. Vanessa means paperwork coordination during restructuring, he said smoothly. Of course, Vanessa added instantly. But the damage was done. Selma took another slow sip of wine while her pulse hammered violently beneath her calm expression. There it was. Confirmation. Not proof yet, but confirmation. The rest of dinner blurred slightly after that. Margaret criticized the charity board. Dale performed success like theater. Vanessa watched Selma too carefully now, and Trevor kept studying his brother with growing discomfort. By dessert, Selma could physically feel the tension tightening beneath the polished surface of the table. Then came the final humiliation. One investor asked Selma politely, "So what do you do?" Mrs. Matthews Dale answered before she could. "Selma keeps our lives beautiful." The sentence landed softly, cruelly, like a compliment shaped into a cage. Several people smiled approvingly. Selma looked at Dale for a long moment. Did he even hear himself anymore? Did he realize how small he needed her to be? Or had this become so normal that he genuinely believed he was praising her? She smiled softly enough to satisfy the table. "That used to be enough for me." Dale barely reacted, but Trevor did. His eyes flicked sharply towards Selma. Because unlike everyone else, Trevor heard the warning inside the sentence. Dinner finally ended around 10:30. Guests drifted toward the valet area beneath soft rain and glowing lantern lights. Selma stood alone beneath the covered entrance, waiting for the car, when Trevor approached quietly beside her. "You know something," he said. Not a question. A statement. Selma kept her gaze forward. "That's a dangerous thing to say." Trevor shoved his hands into his coat pockets. "I've known my brother my whole life." His jaw tightened slightly. "And lately, he acts like a man hiding gasoline in the walls." Rain poured steadily beyond the entrance. Inside the club, laughter echoed faintly. Selma finally turned toward him. Trevor lowered his voice. "I don't know what's happening, Selma." He paused carefully. "But I think Dale's afraid of you noticing something." Selma stared at him silently. Then, for the first time all night, she smiled for real. Small. Cold. Knowing. The first thing Selma noticed after deciding to fight back was how exhausting pretending had become. Every smile felt calculated now. Every dinner. Every touch from Dale. Every fake kiss before he left for work. Performance. That was all their marriage really was anymore. And strangely, once Selma accepted that truth, fear started losing its grip on her. Sunday morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen while Dale stood near the marble counter, skimming emails on his phone. Selma scrambled eggs quietly beside him. Domestic? Normal. A perfect little suburban lie. "You should come to Chicago with me next week," Dale said suddenly. Selma glanced over. "For the acquisition meetings?" Mm-hmm. Interesting. He almost never included her in business travel anymore. Why now? Dale shrugged casually. Investors like seeing stability? There it was. Not partnership. Presentation. Selma turned back toward the stove before he could read her expression. "You mean they like seeing the wife?" Dale laughed softly, like she'd made a charming joke. "See, that's why everyone loves you. No drama. No drama." Selma wondered if he had any idea how often women were praised for their silence right before they broke. He kissed her cheek quickly before leaving for a call upstairs. The moment his footsteps disappeared, Selma grabbed her phone and opened the encrypted folder Rachel had helped her create. For the past week, every piece of evidence had been organized meticulously. Transaction records, voice recordings, ownership transfers, shell entities. What started as suspicion had become horrifyingly clear. Dale wasn't simply hiding money, he was systematically preparing to erase her financially. Selma sat at the kitchen island staring at spreadsheets, while cold coffee sat untouched beside her. The patterns emerged quickly once she stopped doubting her own intelligence. Properties purchased under secondary LLCs, consulting payments rerouted through offshore accounts, investment profits hidden beneath layered corporations, and threaded through all of it: her work, her old strategies, her frameworks, her mind. Dale had built an empire using pieces of her while slowly convincing her she contributed nothing. The psychological cruelty of it almost impressed her. Her laptop buzzed with an incoming video call. Rachel. Selma answered immediately. "You look terrifying," Rachel said, instead of hello. Selma blinked faintly. "Excuse me?" Rachel smirked slightly. That's the face of a woman reconnecting with her IQ. For the first time in days, Selma almost smiled. Rachel's expression quickly turned serious again. "Tell me what you found." Selma rotated the laptop camera toward the documents spread across the kitchen island. 3 additional shell companies, she said. 1 in Delaware. 2 overseas. Rachel whistled softly. "And look at this." Selma pulled up another file. The property transfers overlap with the acquisition timeline almost perfectly. Rachel leaned closer toward her screen. "Oh my God." "Exactly." Rachel stared at Selma for a long moment afterward. Not pitying, not protective, respectful. It startled Selma more than she expected. "You really were brilliant," Rachel murmured. The compliment hurt unexpectedly, because it reminded Selma how much of herself she had abandoned to keep Dale comfortable. Rachel's voice sharpened again. "Listen carefully. Once the acquisition closes, his leverage multiplies dramatically. I know. So if we move, it has to happen before finalization." Selma nodded slowly. Fear curled quietly beneath her ribs. Not fear of being wrong anymore. Fear of how ugly this would become once Dale realized she wasn't staying obedient. Rachel must have sensed it. "You okay?" Selma hesitated, then finally admitted the truth. "I think I'm grieving in reverse." Rachel frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Selma stared toward the enormous backyard outside the windows. "It's strange," she whispered. "I cried more when I thought he still loved me." Silence. "He doesn't get to break you twice," Rachel said softly. Upstairs, footsteps echoed faintly. Dale coming back down. Selma immediately minimized the files. Rachel noticed. "You still hiding the evidence physically?" "Yes." "Good. Don't trust shared cloud access. Men like Dale panic when control slips." Rachel paused carefully. "And panic makes arrogant men dangerous." The call ended moments before Dale entered the kitchen again, adjusting his watch. "You talking to someone, Rachel?" Dale's expression shifted almost invisibly. Too fast for most people to notice. Not fast enough for Selma anymore. Rachel Bennett. "Yes." "What for?" The question sounded casual. It wasn't. Selma folded a dish towel calmly. "She invited me to lunch next week." Dale studied her face for a second too long, then smiled. "That's nice." But his eyes stayed alert, watching, calculating. Interesting. Maybe Trevor was right. Maybe Dale was starting to feel something slipping. Later that afternoon, Selma drove alone into Manhattan for another meeting with Rachel. This time they met inside a quiet private office belonging to a forensic accounting firm Rachel trusted. The lead investigator, Martin Hale, looked closer to a professor than a financial bloodhound. Gray-haired, thin-framed glasses, calm voice. But after reviewing Dale's records for 15 minutes, even he looked unsettled. "This is sophisticated concealment," Martin admitted. "Your husband's either very smart or very advised." Both, Selma said quietly. Martin nodded grimly. "What concerns me most isn't the hidden assets," he continued. "It's the timing." Rachel crossed her arms. meaning Martin rotated his monitor toward them. These transfers accelerated sharply over the past 8 months. He pointed toward highlighted sections, which usually indicates anticipation of litigation, divorce, or regulatory exposure. Selma's stomach tightened. Dale hadn't been thinking casually about leaving her. He had been planning it strategically. For months, maybe years. Martin continued scrolling, then suddenly paused. Wait. Rachel leaned forward. What Martin zoomed into a cluster of ownership records tied to consulting documents. A strange silence settled across the room. Selma felt it instantly. What is it? She asked. Martin looked directly at her. These intellectual property filings, he clicked again. They predate your husband's corporate registrations. Rachel's eyes widened. Selma's pulse quickened violently, meaning she already knew the answer before he said it aloud. Martin leaned back slowly. Mrs. Matthews, he said carefully, there's a legitimate argument that portions of your husband's company were built using assets legally attributable to you. The room went completely still. Selma stared at the screen without blinking, because suddenly, this wasn't just about surviving divorce anymore. This was about ownership, power, legacy. Everything Dale believed belonged solely to him. Rachel looked almost impressed now. Well, she said quietly, that changes things. Selma barely heard her. Her mind was racing too fast. Flashbacks flooded violently through her thoughts. Nights spent helping Dale build presentations. Ideas brainstormed over cheap wine in their first apartment. Business models sketched across napkins. She had loved him so completely back then, trusted him so fully, and he had taken that trust, then monetized it. Selma closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, something inside her felt fundamentally different, harder, clearer. Rachel noticed immediately. There she is, Rachel murmured softly. Selma looked up. Who Rachel gave a small, knowing smile. The woman he spent 15 years trying to make disappear. For the first time in a very long while, Selma believed she might still exist, and that realization was far more dangerous than Dale Matthews understood. Selma had forgotten how much Manhattan sharpened people. The city demanded clarity, movement, confidence. There was no space for hesitation inside buildings made of glass and ambition, especially not in the tower belonging to Brooks Capital. Selma stood in the elevator watching numbers climb toward the 47th floor while smoothing invisible wrinkles from the sleeve of her navy coat. Her pulse was steady. That surprised her. 2 months ago, walking into a corporate boardroom again would have terrified her. Now, she felt something colder than fear. Purpose. The elevator doors opened into a reception area, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown. Assistants moved quickly between offices while muted conversations drifted through the polished space. A receptionist smiled professionally. Mrs. Matthews Selma nodded. Ms. Brooks will see you now. Naomi Brooks's office looked less decorative than powerful. Minimalist furniture, dark wood, no family photos, no softness anywhere. The woman standing near the windows matched the room perfectly. Naomi Brooks was in her early 50s with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a sleek knot and eyes that looked trained to detect weakness before introductions even finished. She turned as Selma entered. For exactly 2 seconds, Naomi's expression carried polite disinterest, the look powerful women often gave wealthy executives' wives. Then she extended her hand. Mrs. Matthews, Selma is fine. Naomi gestured toward the seating area. Please? Selma sat carefully, while Naomi remained standing another moment studying her. I'll be honest, Naomi said finally. When Rachel Bennett contacted me, I assumed this meeting would involve marital concerns affecting the acquisition. Selma almost smiled. Reasonable assumption. Naomi crossed one leg elegantly before continuing. But Rachel doesn't waste my time. So I'm listening. No warmth, no cruelty, just precision. Selma respected that immediately. She placed a leather folder on the table between them. Before Dale Matthews built Harrow Capital, She said calmly, "He built ideas with me." Naomi's expression remained unreadable. Selma opened the folder. Inside were handwritten strategy drafts, market expansion frameworks, archived email exchanges, time-stamped consulting documents, intellectual property records. Naomi leaned forward slightly, then more sharply. The shift was subtle, but Selma noticed. Good. Your acquisition restructuring model. Selma continued quietly, is partially based on a phased integration framework I developed 11 years ago. Naomi flipped through the pages slowly. The room became very still. Selma watched her carefully, waiting. Finally, Naomi looked up. These dates are authentic, yes. And Dale Matthews presented these concepts as internal executive development, yes. Naomi leaned back slightly. Interesting. Not disbelief. Recognition. Selma felt it immediately. Naomi had seen this kind of theft before. Corporate America was full of men who rebranded women's intelligence as leadership. Naomi continued reading, then suddenly paused. Her eyes narrowed slightly at one particular page. Where did you study Columbia? Naomi looked up sharply now. Finance. Yes. Something flickered across Naomi's face. Memory. You're Selma Whitaker. Selma blinked. She hadn't heard her maiden name spoken in years. Naomi stared at her carefully now. You wrote the adaptive volatility thesis during your graduate fellowship. Selma looked genuinely stunned. Naomi gave a faint, humorless laugh. Half the firms on Wall Street were passing around copies of that paper 15 years ago. For a moment, Selma forgot how to breathe. Because somewhere between marriage and survival, she had forgotten she once mattered outside of being somebody's wife. Naomi kept staring at her. What happened to you? The question landed gently, which somehow made it hurt more. Selma looked away toward the skyline. I got married. Silence. Naomi understood immediately. Of course she did. Women like Naomi didn't rise through corporate finance without learning exactly how brilliance got buried inside relationships. Naomi closed the folder carefully. This acquisition, she said, slowly would collapse under intellectual property litigation if what you're presenting is verified. It's verifiable. I know. Selma met her gaze. Naomi's eyes sharpened further. So the question becomes, she folded her hands together. Why are you really here? There it was. The real question. Not evidence, not legality, intent. Selma hesitated, because revenge sounded uglier out loud than it felt privately. Finally, she answered honestly, I spent years believing I was losing my mind. Her voice stayed calm. Dale made me feel emotional for noticing inconsistencies, ungrateful for asking questions, difficult for wanting transparency. Naomi listened silently. And then one day, Selma continued softly, I realized something terrifying. What Selma looked directly at her. He never wanted me confused. A pause. He wanted me small. The room went quiet again. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered beneath pale afternoon sunlight. Naomi studied Selma for a long moment. Then she asked quietly, Do you still love him? The question surprised her. Selma looked down at her hands. The wedding ring still sat there, heavy, cold. I love who I thought he was, she admitted. Naomi nodded once. That man usually never existed. The honesty of it almost knocked the air from Selma's lungs. Naomi stood and walked toward the windows. When I was 38, she said suddenly, my husband told me successful women become exhausting eventually. Selma looked up. Naomi kept her gaze on the skyline. He cheated with someone younger, friendlier, less threatening to his ego. A small, bitter smile crossed her face. Then he seemed genuinely shocked when I left. Selma stared at her silently. Naomi turned back around. The difference between powerful women and broken women, she said calmly, is usually just the moment they stop apologizing for seeing the truth. Something inside Selma shifted again. Another fracture breaking open. Naomi returned to her desk. So, she sat down. Let's discuss leverage. For the next hour, they reviewed acquisition timelines, exposure risks, ownership disputes, and strategic vulnerabilities. And slowly, Selma felt herself waking up. Not emotionally, mentally. Her instincts returned with frightening speed. She spotted inconsistencies in valuation structures before Naomi finished explaining them, identified timing weaknesses, predicted investor responses. By the end of the meeting, Naomi no longer looked at her like a wounded wife. She looked at her like an equal, and that realization nearly made Selma emotional. Not because she needed validation from strangers, because she finally understood how deeply she had been deprived of intellectual respect inside her marriage. Naomi eventually closed the final file. "You know what's fascinating," she said. "What you still think this story is about divorce." Selma frowned slightly. Naomi leaned forward. "It isn't." The air in the room tightened. "This," Naomi said, carefully tapping the folder, "is about ownership." Selma's pulse quickened. Naomi's gaze remained steady. "Your husband built an empire believing you were emotionally dependent enough never to challenge him." A pause. "That assumption may become the most expensive mistake of his life." Selma swallowed hard. The weight of everything suddenly felt enormous, dangerous, real. Naomi watched her carefully, then finally asked the question Rachel once asked differently. "So tell me honestly, Selma." The skyline reflected across the office windows, behind her like fractured light. "Do you want revenge?" A pause. "M- Or do you want what belongs to you?" Selma sat very still, because for the first time since this nightmare began, those no longer felt like the same thing. The anniversary party looked exactly like the kind of night magazines wrote about: gold candlelight, live jazz, champagne towers, women wrapped in silk and diamonds, while powerful men shook hands beneath crystal chandeliers, pretending their wealth came from brilliance instead of luck, inheritance, or exploitation. The ballroom at the Whitmore Hotel overlooked Central Park through enormous windows glowing against the Manhattan skyline. Everything was breathtaking, which made the betrayal feel even uglier. Selma stood in front of the mirror inside the penthouse suite upstairs, while a makeup artist adjusted the final details of her appearance. "You have incredible skin," the woman said lightly. Selma smiled faintly. If only emotional damage showed up as visibly as bruises. Behind her, Dale adjusted his tuxedo cuffs while speaking on the phone. "No, tonight has to be perfect," he said sharply. "I want the acquisition announcement clean and controlled." A pause, then softer, and Vanessa Selma's eyes lifted slightly toward the mirror. Dale turned partially away from her instinctively. She knows where to stand. The sentence almost made Selma laugh. Where to stand? As though women in his life were simply pieces positioned around his success. He ended the call moments later and finally looked at her through the mirror. For a second, something unreadable crossed his face. Selma looked stunning tonight. Not decorative, dangerous. The emerald gown wrapped elegantly around her figure, while her dark hair fell in soft waves over one shoulder. Minimal jewelry, no exaggerated glamour. Confidence had begun changing her posture again. And Dale noticed. "You look nice," he said carefully. "Not beautiful, not breathtaking. Nice?" Because men like Dale became stingy with praise whenever they sensed independence growing inside someone they once controlled easily. "Thank you," Selma answered calmly. He walked closer, adjusting the diamond bracelet around her wrist. "You nervous, no?" That surprised him. Selma saw it immediately. Interesting. Dale studied her face another second too long, then smiled lightly. "That's my girl." Her stomach twisted at the phrase. Not from affection, from ownership. Downstairs, guests filled the ballroom with expensive laughter and curated intimacy. The acquisition deal had attracted investors, executives, attorneys, journalists, and social elites from both Manhattan and Connecticut. Tonight wasn't really an anniversary party, it was a coronation. Dale Matthews planned to celebrate becoming untouchable. What he didn't know: half the room had been quietly rearranged by Selma herself. Rachel Bennett arrived first. Black dress, cold eyes, the kind of woman who looked like she carried lawsuits in her purse for entertainment. She kissed Selma's cheek softly upon arrival. "You okay?" Selma nodded once. Rachel lowered her voice. "Naomi's here." Selma glanced across the ballroom. Naomi Brooks stood near the bar speaking with two acquisition attorneys. Calm, composed, watching everything. Nearby stood Martin Hale from Forensic Accounting, two federal compliance consultants, and three board members Dale assumed were attending purely for celebration. None of them were there accidentally. Selma had spent 2 weeks orchestrating seating charts, invitation timing, and guest confirmations with terrifying precision. She no longer felt like a woman reacting emotionally to betrayal. She felt strategic, focused, awake. Dale moved effortlessly through the ballroom, shaking hands and accepting congratulations, while Vanessa floated nearby in silver satin, looking radiant and carefully restrained. Not girlfriend, not official mistress. Yet. But tonight was supposed to change that. Selma knew because she had accidentally intercepted the synced event schedule from Dale's assistant. Private celebration after announcement, 8:30 p.m. Vanessa already thought she was stepping into Selma's future. Poor thing. The jazz music softened as waiters carried champagne through the room. Dale eventually climbed onto the small stage near the center of the ballroom and tapped his glass lightly. The room quieted instantly. Showtime. Selma stood near the front beside Rachel, while Dale smiled at the crowd with polished confidence. "I want to thank everyone here tonight," he began smoothly. "Not only for celebrating our anniversary, but for celebrating what comes next." Applause. Selma noticed Vanessa smiling proudly near the stage. Dale continued, "Harrow Capital started as an impossible idea." "No," Selma thought quietly. "It started on the floor of a tiny apartment with takeout containers and my unpaid labor. But through sacrifice, discipline, and vision. That word almost choked her with irony. We built something extraordinary." More applause. Then Dale looked directly towards Selma with performative affection. "And of course," he said warmly, "none of this would have been possible without my wife." The spotlight found her immediately. Selma smiled softly. The audience turned toward her admiringly. Dale lifted his glass. "To the woman who never had to understand business to support me." Laughter, gentle, affectionate, cruel. Exactly the way he intended. Selma heard Rachel inhale sharply beside her. Across the ballroom, Naomi Brooks went perfectly still. Vanessa lowered her eyes with a tiny smile. And suddenly, Selma understood something devastating. Dale genuinely believed this narrative. He truly thought reducing her publicly made him look stronger. The room waited for Selma to laugh along politely, like always. For one suspended moment, she almost did. 15 years of conditioning is difficult to kill instantly. Then she remembered the shell companies, the hidden money, the stolen work, the affair, the years spent shrinking herself to protect his ego. Something inside her settled completely. Calm. Dead calm. Dale continued speaking confidently. "The truth is, Selma's greatest strength has always been trust. She never concerns herself with complicated financial matters." He chuckled lightly. Honestly, she'd probably fall asleep reading a contract. More laughter spread across the ballroom. But this time, Selma noticed something different. Not everyone was laughing. Some investors looked uncomfortable now. Naomi wasn't smiling at all. Rachel looked ready to burn the hotel down personally. And Trevor Matthews, standing near the back bar, stared at his brother with visible disbelief. Because even he heard it now. The disrespect. The humiliation disguised as affection. Dale raised his glass again. "To loyalty," he declared proudly. Selma finally moved. Slowly, gracefully. She stepped forward through the ballroom while hundreds of eyes followed her. Dale smiled, automatically assuming she was coming to stand beside him for the perfect wealthy couple photo moment. Instead, Selma reached for the microphone. The entire room shifted instantly. Dale blinked faintly. Selma. Her fingers wrapped around the microphone calmly. Steady. No shaking, no panic. The ballroom became so quiet even the musicians stopped moving. Selma looked at the crowd first, then at Dale. Her husband, the man who had spent years convincing her silence, was love. Finally, she smiled. Not soft this time. Sharp. Controlled. Terrifying. "You're right, Dale," she said gently into the microphone. Confused laughter flickered uncertainly through the room. Selma tilted her head slightly. "I did spend years pretending not to understand business." Dale's smile faltered almost invisibly. "Very few people noticed." Selma did. "And honestly," she continued calmly, "that may have been the smartest investment either of us ever made." Silence crashed across the ballroom. Vanessa's face drained of color instantly. Rachel slowly crossed her arms. Naomi watched with terrifying stillness, and for the first time all night, Dale Matthews looked uncertain, only briefly, but long enough for Selma to see it. Fear. Nobody moved. Not the investors, not the waiters, not even the musicians near the stage. The entire ballroom seemed suspended inside one collective breath, while Selma stood beneath golden chandelier light, holding the microphone with terrifying calm. Dale recovered first, or at least tried to. He laughed softly into his champagne glass, like his wife was making an unexpected joke. "There she is," he said warmly. "I was wondering if you'd finally give a speech tonight." A few nervous guests laughed along automatically. Selma smiled politely, but she didn't hand the microphone back. That was the moment the atmosphere truly changed. Because people like Dale understood power instinctively. And right now, control was slipping publicly through his fingers. Selma turned slowly toward the crowd. "I should probably thank my husband," she said gently. "After all, he spent years teaching me something very valuable." Dale's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Selma continued, "He taught me that when a woman becomes too intelligent, too observant, too capable." Her eyes flicked toward him briefly. Some men stopped seeing her as a partner. The ballroom stayed painfully quiet. Across the room, Vanessa looked frozen. Trevor slowly lowered his drink. Margaret Matthews stared at Selma like she'd suddenly started speaking another language entirely. Dale stepped closer toward her, with that polished executive smile still fixed carefully onto his face. "Sweetheart," he murmured low enough for only nearby guests to hear, "what are you doing?" Selma looked directly at him, and for the first time in 15 years, she didn't soften under his gaze. "I think," she said quietly, "I'm finally participating in the conversation." Rachel almost smiled. Dale's eyes darkened immediately. There it was, the real man underneath the charm, the one who only felt loving when he remained in control. Selma turned back toward the audience before he could interrupt again. "You know," she continued calmly, "Dale always said I wasn't interested in finance." A small pause. "Which is strange, considering I helped build most of the frameworks Harrow Capital still uses today." The room reacted instantly. Not loudly, but visibly. Executives shifted in their seats. Investors exchanged quick glances. Naomi Brooks remained perfectly expressionless, which somehow felt more dangerous than shock. Dale laughed again, sharper this time. "Okay," he said lightly. "I think we're done embarrassing ourselves for tonight." "Ourselves. Interesting." Selma tilted her head. "Embarrassing," she repeated softly. By discussing corporate authorship, a flicker of panic crossed Vanessa's face. Tiny, but real. Selma saw it immediately. "Good." Dale stepped beside her and finally lowered his voice completely. "Give me the microphone." The warmth was gone now. Not loud enough to create a scene, just cold enough to remind her who usually won. Selma looked at him quietly. "No." The single word landed harder than shouting ever could, because Dale Matthews was not accustomed to hearing it from her. Ever. The ballroom felt electrically tense now. Guests pretended not to stare while absolutely staring. Selma turned back toward the audience with graceful composure. 3 years ago, she said I noticed inconsistencies in some financial structures connected to Harrow Capital. Dale's expression changed instantly. Not anger, fear, real fear. He reached for her arm, carefully smiling through clenched teeth. Selma. She gently removed his hand from her body, publicly. The humiliation of that small gesture hit him harder than any accusation could have. Several people visibly noticed, including Naomi, including the investors, including Vanessa. Selma continued speaking. At first, I assumed I was misunderstanding things. Her voice remained calm and heartbreakingly controlled. Because when someone spends enough years telling you you're emotional, eventually you start distrusting your own intelligence. The room grew even quieter somehow. One older woman near the front lowered her eyes suddenly, as though the sentence had hit something personal. Selma's gaze drifted slowly across the ballroom. I told myself I was overreacting. A pause. That I was paranoid. Another pause. That good wives trust their husbands. Dale's breathing visibly sharpened. Enough, he said quietly. But Selma kept going. Then I discovered shell corporations. The room detonated internally. Not loudly, but violently. Investors straightened immediately. Someone near the back whispered what Vanessa looked like she might faint. Dale's executive mask finally cracked completely. Selma, he snapped, you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. There he was, the same man who always appeared whenever she stopped behaving conveniently. Selma met his gaze steadily. No, then calmly. She reached into the folder beside the podium. Rachel inhaled softly. Dale went completely still. Selma lifted several documents into view. Dated filings, transfer records, corporate structures. Nothing fully devastating yet, just enough. Enough to terrify the right people. The acquisition attorneys near Naomi immediately started whispering to each other. One board member stood up halfway from his chair. Dale moved closer toward Selma again, but now there was panic beneath the anger. What the hell are you doing? He hissed. Selma looked at him with heartbreaking calm. The first honest thing in our marriage. That sentence cut deeper than anything else tonight, because somewhere beneath all the manipulation and arrogance, Dale knew it was true. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward. Dale, she whispered urgently. Wrong move. Every eye in the room shifted toward her instantly. Selma looked at Vanessa slowly, then smiled. Not cruelly, almost sadly. You seem nervous. Vanessa swallowed hard. I don't know what you think this is. Oh, I know exactly what this is. Their eyes locked across the ballroom. And suddenly, the entire room understood far more than either of them intended. Mistress, affair, complicity, corporate misconduct. Everything hidden beneath polished appearances started bleeding through the cracks all at once. Margaret Matthews stood abruptly. This is insane, she snapped. Selma, whatever emotional episode you're having, please don't call me emotional tonight, Margaret. The room went silent again. Margaret looked genuinely stunned, not because Selma interrupted her, because Selma had never interrupted her before. Trevor stared at Selma with something dangerously close to admiration now. Dale tried one final time to regain control. He stepped toward the audience with practiced charm. Everyone, I apologize. My wife has clearly misunderstood several internal financial procedures, and she authored them. Naomi Brooks spoke for the first time all night. The entire ballroom froze. Naomi stood slowly from her table near the back. Calm, elegant, lethal. She looked directly at Dale. The frameworks in question predate Harrow Capital's registrations. A measured pause, by years. Dale's face lost color. The acquisition attorneys looked horrified now. One investor muttered, "Oh my God." Selma stood perfectly still beside the microphone, while chaos quietly began spreading through the room like smoke. Phones appeared discreetly beneath tables. Executives whispered urgently. Legal teams recalculated risk in real time. And through all of it, Dale stared only at Selma, like he genuinely could not comprehend what he was seeing. Not anger, not hysteria, not revenge, competence. That frightened him most. Selma looked back at him steadily, then finally said the sentence that shattered whatever remained of his certainty. You told everyone I was too naive to understand business. Her voice stayed soft. But Dale, she tilted her head slightly. You built your entire life banking on the assumption that I would never stop pretending. Vanessa's face drained completely. And in that exact moment, Dale Matthews realized the most dangerous thing in the room tonight was not the evidence. It was the woman he had spent 15 years underestimating. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a building seconds before collapse. No one touched their champagne now. No one laughed. The jazz band sat frozen near the stage, pretending not to listen, while every executive investor and attorney in the room recalculated the night in real time. Because scandals in wealthy circles moved differently, quietly, like poison spreading beneath silk. Dale stood center stage beside Selma, breathing too carefully. That was the first sign he was truly panicking. When Dale Matthews lost control emotionally, he became calmer externally, colder, sharper, more dangerous. You're confused, he said, finally addressing the room with controlled professionalism. My wife is emotional right now and interpreting normal corporate structures as something sinister. There it was again. Emotional. The word he used any time a woman became inconvenient. Selma watched him quietly. For years, that tone had worked on her. Not anymore. Naomi Brooks crossed one leg elegantly from her table near the back. With respect, she said calmly, nothing about offshore concealment structures during acquisition negotiations is normal. Silence hit again. One investor cursed quietly under his breath. Dale's eyes snapped toward Naomi. You're making assumptions based on incomplete context. Naomi held his gaze evenly. Then clarify the context. He couldn't. Selma knew it immediately. Because the problem with lies was never telling them. It was maintaining them once intelligent people started comparing notes publicly. Rachel stepped forward beside Selma now. Perfect timing. Perfect posture. Every inch of her looked expensive and lethal. As legal counsel, Rachel said smoothly, I'd strongly recommend nobody connected to this acquisition destroy, transfer, or alter any records after tonight. The sentence landed like a gunshot. Several executives immediately reached for their phones. Vanessa visibly paled. Dale's jaw flexed sharply. You brought an attorney to our anniversary party. Our anniversary party? Interesting how quickly he returned to the language of marriage when his empire needed protection. Selma looked at him steadily. You brought your mistress. A collective inhale swept the room. Vanessa looked like she wanted the floor to open beneath her. Margaret Matthews stood abruptly. This is disgusting, she snapped. Selma, have you completely lost your mind? Selma turned slowly toward her mother-in-law. No, Margaret. Her voice remained calm. I think I finally stopped losing it. Margaret stared at her speechlessly. Because for the first time, Selma wasn't shrinking to make other people comfortable. And people accustomed to your silence often interpret your boundaries as cruelty. Dale stepped closer again, lowering his voice. We are not doing this here. The threat beneath the sentence was unmistakable now. Selma tilted her head slightly. Why? She asked softly. Because people might finally see you clearly. Something dangerous flashed across his face. For one terrifying second, Selma saw exactly how much rage lived underneath his polished exterior. Not because she exposed him, because she embarrassed him publicly. That was the real unforgivable sin to men like Dale. Trevor suddenly moved closer toward the stage. Dale, he said carefully, maybe you should calm down. Dale turned sharply. Stay out of this. Trevor's expression hardened. No. The room shifted again. The brothers almost never openly disagreed in public, and now even Trevor was no longer protecting him. Vanessa stepped forward nervously. Everyone needs to stop escalating this, she said quickly. There are explanations for all of it. Selma looked directly at her. You mean the shell companies? Vanessa swallowed hard. Or the hidden asset transfers? Selma continued softly. Or the falsified ownership filings? Dale interrupted immediately. Enough. The single word cracked through the ballroom. Guests visibly flinched. Not because he yelled, because the mask finally slipped. Selma looked at him with heartbreaking calm. You know, she said quietly, that's the first honest tone you've used with me in years. That hit harder than the accusations, because Dale knew she was right. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Naomi stood fully. I'm suspending acquisition discussions. Effective immediately, she announced calmly. The room exploded into overlapping conversations. What? You can't be serious, Jesus Christ. Do you know what this means? Dale's face lost all remaining color. No, he said sharply. You don't get to make that decision based on my wife's emotional accusations. Naomi's gaze turned ice cold. Your wife provided documentation. She's manipulating partial information. Selma almost laughed. Manipulating. Another favorite word men used when women became strategically intelligent. Rachel opened a slim folder calmly. We also have recorded conversations regarding concealed transfers and spousal signature coordination. Vanessa went visibly white. Dale looked at her instantly. And in that tiny moment, Selma understood everything. Vanessa had never realized how much evidence existed. Interesting. Very interesting. You recorded us, Dale hissed. Selma met his gaze steadily. No, she said softly. I listened. That sentence shattered something in him. Because underneath all the financial panic and public humiliation, Dale was finally confronting the truth. Selma had not suddenly become intelligent. She had always been intelligent. He had simply depended on her love enough to weaponize it against her. Margaret grabbed her purse furiously. I refuse to stand here while this family gets destroyed over paranoia. Selma turned toward her slowly. This family was destroyed long before tonight. Margaret froze. Selma's voice softened painfully. You just benefited too much from my silence to notice. Even Trevor looked stunned by that one. Because it was true. Margaret loved the version of Selma that absorbed disrespect quietly while protecting the Matthews family image. But not one person in that family ever truly protected Selma in return. Dale suddenly stepped close enough that only she could hear him. You think this makes you powerful? He whispered. Selma looked up at him calmly. No? He stared at her. I think finally seeing you clearly makes me free. The words landed directly in his chest. She saw it happen. For years, Dale controlled every emotional temperature inside their marriage. Now he couldn't control hers at all, and it terrified him. Phones buzzed across the ballroom now as news quietly began spreading outward through legal teams and financial networks. The acquisition was already bleeding publicly. Dale noticed it too. His breathing sharpened. Everything he built was beginning to crack open in front of witnesses. Then Vanessa made the mistake that changed the night completely. She grabbed Dale's arm. We need to leave, she whispered urgently. Selma saw it immediately. Not concern, self-preservation. Vanessa wasn't afraid for Dale. She was afraid for herself. And suddenly, Selma understood something almost funny. Vanessa never loved him either. She loved proximity to power, the same way Dale loved admiration instead of intimacy. Perfect match. Until collapse arrived. Dale pulled his arm away from Vanessa, harshly enough to make several guests notice. Bad move, very bad move, because now the room wasn't watching a respected executive anymore. They were watching a cornered man. Selma stepped back from the microphone slowly. The ballroom remained chaotic around her, but internally, she felt strangely peaceful. Not victorious. Not yet. Just awake. Fully awake. Dale stared at her like he genuinely didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him anymore. And maybe he didn't. because the woman who once apologized for his cruelty was gone now. In her place stood someone far more dangerous, a woman who finally trusted her own mind. Dale's voice dropped low and desperate. "You're destroying everything." Selma looked at him for a long moment, then answered quietly, "No, Dale." A pause. "I'm just refusing to let you keep destroying me." And somehow, that sentence hurt him more than losing the deal ever could. The penthouse suite was silent when they returned home. Not peaceful silence, the kind that comes after explosions. Dale walked in first, ripping his bow tie loose before tossing it violently across the living room. Crystal whiskey decanters rattled inside the bar cabinet from the force. Selma entered slowly behind him and closed the door quietly. For 15 years, she had feared moments like this. Dale angry. Dale cornered. Dale stripped of the polished mask he wore for the world. But tonight something felt different. For the first time, Selma was no longer trying to survive his emotions. She was simply witnessing them. "You humiliated me," Dale said without turning around. There it was. Not "you hurt me." Not "how could you do this to us?" Just humiliation, image, ego. Selma slipped off her heels calmly near the doorway. "You humiliated me for years." Dale spun toward her sharply. That was different. The words escaped him too fast, and both of them heard the truth inside them instantly. Different, because he benefited from it. Selma looked at him quietly. Dale ran both hands through his hair aggressively. "You blindsided me in front of investors, attorneys, board members." He laughed bitterly. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes?" His jaw tightened. "No, you don't." He stepped closer. "You destroyed the acquisition." "No," Selma corrected softly. "Your fraud did." The word hit him like a slap. Fraud. Not misunderstanding, not marital conflict. Fraud. Dale's face darkened immediately. "You think Rachel Bennett gives a damn about you?" he snapped. "She's using you." Selma almost smiled. Interesting. Men like Dale always assume manipulation made more sense than awakening, because they could not imagine women choosing themselves without outside influence. "She reminded me who I used to be," Selma said quietly. "That's exactly what I mean." "No." Selma shook her head slowly. "You just don't like that I remembered." Dale stared at her. Really stared at her. Like he was searching for the woman who used to retreat whenever his voice sharpened. But she wasn't there anymore. The realization unsettled him visibly. He walked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan and poured himself whiskey with shaking hands. "You could have talked to me privately." Selma laughed softly for the first time all night. The sound startled both of them. "Privately," she repeated. "Like how you privately move money through shell companies?" Dale slammed the glass down. "This is exactly why I stopped telling you things." There it was again. The blame shifting, the psychological twisting. Selma remembered how effective it once felt. Now it just sounded tired. "You stopped telling me things," she said calmly, "because transparency only works when both people have equal power." Dale turned toward her sharply. "I gave you everything." The sentence echoed through the suite. And suddenly, Selma understood something heartbreaking. He genuinely believed that. The house, the jewelry, the lifestyle. Dale truly thought financial comfort erased emotional destruction. Selma folded her arms lightly. "You gave me luxury," she said softly, "not respect." Silence. Dale looked away first. "That almost never happened. You have no idea what pressure I've been under," he muttered. Selma stared at him, and there it was, the opening. The place where old Selma would have softened instantly, comforted him, prioritized his pain over her own. But now she finally saw the pattern clearly. Every confrontation in their marriage eventually became about protecting Dale emotionally from consequences he created himself. No more. "You're right," Selma said quietly. "I don't know what it feels like to betray someone who trusted me completely." Dale inhaled sharply. You think this affair is the issue. He scoffed bitterly. God, Selma, you're so focused on Vanessa because it's easier than admitting the truth. What truth? That you checked out of this marriage years ago. The accusation stunned her momentarily, not because it was entirely false, because part of it was. Selma stared at him carefully. You're rewriting history now? No. Dale stepped closer again. You stopped being happy a long time ago. Selma's throat tightened unexpectedly, because he wasn't entirely wrong. She had disappeared emotionally years ago, but not for the reasons he wanted to believe. You made me lonely inside my own life, she whispered. For one brief second, something flickered across Dale's face. Real guilt, tiny, fragile. Then his ego swallowed it again. You always needed too much reassurance. Selma closed her eyes briefly. There it was. The sentence that explained everything. Not I failed you, but you needed too much. Women were always too much once they started asking for reciprocity. She looked at him again slowly. Do you know what the saddest part is? Dale didn't answer. I kept shrinking myself because I thought love required compromise. Her voice trembled slightly now. I didn't realize I was the only one disappearing. The room fell silent again. Dale looked exhausted suddenly. Older. Not sympathetic. Just exposed. He sat heavily on the couch and rubbed his face. You think I wanted this, he muttered. Selma blinked slowly. The affair? All of it? Interesting. Not regret? Just resentment toward consequences. Dale leaned forward with whiskey dangling loosely from one hand. Do you know how much pressure comes with building something that big? He asked. Everyone depends on you. Investors, employees, boards. He looked up bitterly. You become responsible for everyone. Selma stared at him. And who was responsible for me? That question landed heavily. Dale opened his mouth, then stopped, because he genuinely had no answer. Selma felt tears burn unexpectedly behind her eyes now, not because she still hoped he would change, because she finally understood he never planned to. She walked slowly toward the kitchen island and rested both hands against the marble surface. You know what hurts most? She asked quietly. Dale stayed silent. You convinced me my sensitivity was weakness. Her voice cracked slightly, but sensitivity was the only honest thing left in this marriage. Dale looked away. The city lights reflected across the windows behind him. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked small, not financially, not socially, spiritually, like a man who spent so long protecting his image that he no longer understood intimacy at all. Then suddenly, his expression hardened again. Cold, strategic, dangerous. Rachel put you up to this, he said flatly. Selma almost laughed. She didn't create the evidence, Dale. You think courts care about emotional betrayal? He stood again. You have no idea how ugly this is about to become. There it was. The threat. Finally. Honest. Selma looked directly at him. I'm not afraid of ugly anymore. Dale stepped closer slowly. You should be. For a moment, the silence between them felt genuinely frightening. Then Selma realized something that changed everything. She was no longer afraid of losing him, and once that fear died, so did his power. Her phone buzzed suddenly against the counter. Rachel. Selma answered immediately. Tell me you're somewhere safe, Rachel said without greeting. Selma frowned slightly. Why? A pause? Then Rachel's voice lowered. Because Dale's legal team just filed emergency motions to freeze shared marital accounts. Silence. Dale's expression shifted instantly. Caught. Selma looked at him slowly, and suddenly, the last fragile illusion shattered completely. Even now, even after everything, he was still trying to punish her financially for refusing to stay obedient. Selma lowered the phone carefully, then looked at the man she once loved enough to abandon herself for. You were already planning to leave me with nothing, she said softly. Dale didn't deny it. and somehow that hurt more than the affair ever did. The law offices of Bennett and Rowe overlooked lower Manhattan like a fortress made of glass. Cold morning sunlight reflected across conference room walls, while attorneys moved briskly through hallways, carrying binders thick enough to destroy reputations. Selma sat at the end of the conference table, wearing a charcoal suit she hadn't touched in over a decade. It still fit perfectly. That felt symbolic somehow. Rachel entered carrying coffee and several legal folders tucked beneath one arm. "You look terrifying today," she said approvingly. Selma accepted the coffee quietly. "I think that's becoming a theme. It suits you." For the first time in weeks, Selma almost smiled naturally. Almost. But exhaustion still sat heavy beneath her skin. 3 days had passed since the anniversary disaster. 3 days of headlines, whispers, legal filings, and financial panic. 3 days of Dale trying desperately to contain damage already spreading beyond his control. The acquisition had officially stalled. Several investors were demanding internal audits. 2 board members resigned quietly, and Vanessa Cole had suddenly become impossible to reach publicly. Interesting timing? Rachel placed several documents on the table. "Okay," she said professionally. "Bad news first." Selma exhaled softly. "Go ahead." "Dale's attorneys are arguing you had no formal ownership involvement in Harrow Capital." Rachel slid over another file, "and they're trying to characterize your contributions as casual marital support." Selma stared at the papers without reacting. Of course they were. That was the irony of invisible labor. People benefited from it constantly, while pretending it never existed legally. Rachel leaned forward slightly, but Selma looked up. Rachel smiled slowly. "I hate arrogant men." Selma blinked. Rachel pushed another folder toward her. "Your husband got sloppy because he underestimated you emotionally." Her smile widened. "Which means he underestimated you administratively too?" Selma opened the folder carefully. Inside were old consulting agreements, archived compensation drafts, email chains, intellectual property records, and there, one signature, Dale's. Her pulse quickened instantly. Rachel tapped the page. "8 years ago, your husband formally acknowledged your strategic consulting contributions during early expansion phases." Selma stared at the document. "He signed this, oh yes." Rachel leaned back, probably assuming you'd never need it. For several seconds, Selma couldn't speak, because once again, Dale's greatest vulnerability had never been greed. It was certainty. He genuinely believed she would stay small forever. Rachel's phone buzzed against the table. She checked the screen briefly, then sighed. What court hearing got moved earlier? Rachel stood immediately. "We leave in 20. Selma nodded slowly, and suddenly fear hit her hard for the first time in days. Not fear of Dale, fear of visibility, because surviving emotional manipulation often teaches women to hide instinctively. And now she was walking into public conflict with powerful people watching. Rachel noticed immediately. "Hey," Selma looked up, "you belong in these rooms." The words landed deeper than Rachel probably realized, because for years, Selma stopped believing that. Courtrooms always looked smaller in movies. In reality, everything felt painfully intimate. Every sound echoed. Every expression mattered. Every silence carried weight. Dale sat across the courtroom beside his legal team, wearing a navy suit and controlled fury. He looked immaculate, untouched. That was the terrifying thing about men like Dale. They could destroy women privately while still appearing polished publicly. But today, something underneath his composure looked frayed. Selma noticed it instantly. Good. Vanessa was absent. Margaret sat behind Dale, stiffly radiating icy disapproval toward Selma without interruption. Trevor sat 2 seats away from her, looking exhausted and deeply uncomfortable. The hearing began sharply. Procedural motions, asset concerns, financial disclosures. Rachel dismantled Dale's emergency account freeze requests with surgical precision. "Your Honor," she said calmly, The timing of these financial restrictions coincides directly with exposure risks surrounding concealed corporate structures. Dale's attorney immediately objected. Rachel continued anyway, and slowly, the room shifted because facts behaved differently than manipulation. Facts didn't care about charisma. The judge reviewed documents silently for several minutes, then finally looked toward Dale. Mr. Matthews, he said carefully, were portions of your company's operational framework developed using material connected to your wife's prior consulting work? Dale answered smoothly. My wife occasionally offered informal opinions during our marriage. Informal opinions? Selma almost laughed. Thousands of unpaid hours reduced to decorative suggestions. Rachel stood immediately. Permission to present evidence contradicting that characterization. Granted. Rachel approached the bench carrying several binders, emails, contracts, time-stamped strategy drafts, financial overlap analyses. The courtroom became very quiet as evidence stacked higher. Dale's composure tightened visibly. Rachel turned toward him. Would you describe this document as informal marital conversation? She displayed one of the signed consulting acknowledgments. Dale's face changed instantly. Tiny shift. Massive meaning. Because he recognized it. The courtroom noticed too. Rachel continued calmly. Or, this compensation draft, another document. Or these acquisition models carrying identical structural sequencing to Mrs. Matthews's archived materials dated years prior. Dale's attorney objected repeatedly now. Too repeatedly. The judge looked increasingly unimpressed. Selma sat silently beside Rachel while realization spread slowly through the courtroom. Not only had she contributed, she had been foundational. The emotional weight of that realization nearly overwhelmed her unexpectedly. Not because she needed public validation, because for years she had been gaslit into questioning her own significance. And now strangers in a courtroom were acknowledging what her husband spent years erasing. Trevor suddenly stood unexpectedly from the gallery. Rachel blinked. Even Dale looked startled. Your Honor? Trevor said carefully, I'd like the record to reflect something. Dale's eyes darkened immediately. Trevor looked at his brother finally. I'm done helping you pretend. The courtroom fell completely silent. Trevor swallowed hard. I remember those years, he said quietly. Selma built half the ideas Dale took credit for. He glanced toward Selma briefly. Everybody in the family knew she was brilliant. Margaret looked horrified. Dale looked murderous. But Trevor kept going. We just benefited too much from her silence to say anything. Selma felt tears sting her eyes instantly. Not because of the testimony, because someone finally admitted it aloud. The complicity. The comfort people found in watching women diminish themselves quietly. Dale stood abruptly. This is absurd. No polished calm anymore. No executive composure. Just anger. Real anger. You're all acting like I forced Selma into some miserable existence. Selma slowly looked toward him. The courtroom waited. Dale laughed bitterly. She lived in luxury. She had every opportunity. His eyes locked onto hers. You chose this life. And there it was. The misunderstanding at the center of everything. Selma stood slowly. Rachel glanced at her carefully, but said nothing. Selma looked directly at Dale across the courtroom. Yes, she said softly. I chose you. Silence. But loving someone shouldn't require disappearing inside their shadow. The courtroom went still again. Dale stared at her speechlessly. Selma's voice trembled slightly now. I kept sacrificing pieces of myself because I thought marriage meant compromise. A painful pause. I didn't realize compromise only counted when both people were losing something. Even the judge looked affected now. Dale's expression shifted strangely. Not remorse, recognition. Because for the first time, he was hearing the emotional truth without being able to interrupt it. The judge reviewed several final pages slowly, then finally looked toward Dale again. Mr. Matthews, he said carefully, Can you explain why intellectual property connected to your wife appears under shell entities associated with concealed financial structures? Dale opened his mouth, then stopped. For the first time since this began, Dale Matthews had no immediate answer, and everyone in the room saw it. The empire didn't collapse all at once. That was the strange part. Selma used to imagine karma like lightning, instant, violent, dramatic. But real destruction happened quietly. Phone calls stopped getting returned. Board members disappeared behind carefully worded statements. Investors suddenly became unavailable, and little by little, Dale Matthews began discovering how lonely power became once fear and admiration disappeared. 3 weeks after the court hearing, Harrow Capital's offices looked like a building after evacuation. Muted hallways, closed conference rooms, assistants whispering nervously near elevators, employees pretending not to stare when Dale walked past. News outlets never published the full scandal. Directly, wealth protected itself too carefully for that, but enough details leaked through financial circles to poison confidence permanently. Acquisition terminated. Internal audit initiated. Possible concealment investigation pending. That was all it took. Selma no longer lived at the estate by then. She had moved into a luxury apartment overlooking the Hudson River in Tribeca. The space was smaller than the mansion, but somehow breathing felt easier there. No echoes, no performance, no memories trapped inside the walls. The first night alone, she sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, eating takeout noodles directly from the container while rain hit the window softly. And, unexpectedly, she cried harder than she had during the betrayal itself. Not because she missed Dale, because she finally had enough silence to hear herself again. Healing, she realized, was not glamorous. It was awkward, lonely, exhausting. Some mornings she woke up feeling powerful. Other mornings she stared at the ceiling, wondering how 15 years vanished so quietly. Rachel checked on her constantly. Naomi sent business proposals disguised as casual emails. Trevor called twice and hung up before speaking. And Dale unraveled publicly with astonishing speed. Not emotionally, strategically. Because men like Dale built identities around control. Once control disappeared, they had no idea who they were underneath it. Selma first heard about Vanessa through Rachel. "They're done," Rachel said casually during lunch one afternoon. Selma looked up from her salad. Already Rachel snorted softly. Mistresses love luxury. They hate investigations. Selma almost laughed. Almost. What happened? Vanessa retained separate counsel. Rachel took a sip of wine. And apparently, she's cooperating selectively to protect herself from liability. Selma leaned back slowly. There it was. The final betrayal. Not romantic. Predictable. Vanessa had never loved Dale. She loved proximity to power. And once the power cracked, so did the loyalty. Rachel watched Selma carefully. "You okay?" Selma considered the question honestly. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think I actually am." And strangely, she meant it. Not fully healed, not untouched, but lighter. The hardest part wasn't leaving Dale anymore. It was accepting how long she abandoned herself before doing it. A week later, Selma attended a private strategy meeting with Naomi Brooks regarding a new consulting venture. The meeting took place inside a sleek conference room overlooking downtown Manhattan. Halfway through reviewing documents, Naomi suddenly paused. "You're distracted." Selma blinked slightly. "Sorry." Naomi studied her carefully. "You still feel guilty. Not a question." Selma looked down at the papers. "I blew up an entire life." Naomi leaned back calmly. "No," she corrected. "You stopped carrying one alone." The sentence settled heavily inside Selma's chest, because that was the truth she still struggled with. Women were trained to feel responsible for endings, even when they spent years surviving the damage that caused them. Naomi closed the folder gently. "Dale losing his empire isn't your burden." Selma looked out the windows quietly. "It doesn't feel good. Good people usually don't enjoy watching destruction." Naomi paused. "That's what separates accountability from cruelty. The meeting ended shortly afterward. As Selma exited the building into the cool Manhattan evening, her phone buzzed. Trevor. She hesitated before answering. Hey, he said quietly. Hey. Silence stretched briefly. Then Trevor sighed heavily. He's bad, Selma. Her chest tightened despite herself. How bad? Trevor laughed bitterly. You know Dale. He still thinks he can fix everything if he controls the narrative hard enough. Selma closed her eyes briefly. Of course he did. He's blaming everyone, Trevor continued. Vanessa, the board, Rachel. A pause. Mostly you. That hurt less than it once would have. Because now Selma understood something deeply important. People who refuse accountability will always resent the person who forces them to face consequences. Trevor's voice softened. But honestly, he admitted quietly, I think he's finally realizing you're really gone. Selma looked across the street as headlights blurred through evening rain. For years, she thought leaving would feel dramatic, triumphant. Instead, it mostly felt sad, not because she wanted him back, because grieving wasted love was still grief. You know what bothers him most? Trevor asked suddenly. What he keeps saying he doesn't understand when you stopped loving him. Selma swallowed hard, because that answer was complicated. I don't think I stopped all at once, she whispered. Trevor stayed quiet. I think I disappeared slowly, she admitted. And eventually, there wasn't enough of me left inside the marriage to keep loving him properly. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Trevor sighed softly. I'm sorry, he said unexpectedly. Selma frowned slightly. For what? For watching him diminish you for years and pretending it was normal? The honesty hit her hard. Tears stung unexpectedly behind her eyes, because apologies mattered more when they acknowledged complicity honestly. Thank you, she whispered. That night, Selma returned home exhausted, but strangely peaceful. She changed into oversized pajamas and stood barefoot beside the apartment windows overlooking the river. The city glowed endlessly below her. Alive, moving, indifferent. For the first time in years, her future felt unwritten, terrifying, beautiful. Then the intercom buzzed downstairs. Selma frowned. Ms. Matthews, the concierge, said carefully, there's someone here asking to see you. Her stomach tightened instantly. Who? A pause. Then your husband? Silence flooded the apartment. Selma closed her eyes briefly. Of course, some part of her always knew this moment would come eventually. Men like Dale never truly believed women would leave until loneliness forced reality into them. Should I send him away? The concierge asked gently. Selma looked down through the rain-streaked windows toward the street below, and there he was, Dale Matthews. Standing alone beneath Manhattan, rain-holding flowers like apologies could still reverse devastation. For the first time in 15 years, he looked uncertain, human, small. Selma stared at him quietly, while old grief moved painfully through her chest. Then she answered softly, no. Not because she wanted him back, but because she was finally strong enough to hear him without losing herself again. Dale looked older in the rain. Not physically, spiritually. The sharp confidence that once filled every room around him had thinned into something tired and desperate. His expensive coat was damp at the shoulders, hair slightly disheveled from the wind. Selma opened the apartment door slowly. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them no longer felt married. It felt historical, like standing beside the ruins of something that used to shape your entire life. Dale held out the flowers awkwardly. White roses, her favorites. Or at least they used to be. Selma stared at them for a second, before stepping aside quietly. You can come in? He entered carefully, almost uncertainly, like a man walking through a museum dedicated to his own mistakes. The apartment lights were soft and warm against the rain-dark city outside. Jazz played quietly from hidden speakers, while the scent of vanilla candles lingered faintly in the air. Peaceful, Dale noticed immediately. This place felt nothing like the mansion. No performance, no cold luxury, just calm. He looked around slowly. It's nice. Selma closed the door behind him. It feels honest. The sentence landed. Of course it did. Dale set the flowers carefully on the kitchen counter. You look good, he said quietly. Selma almost smiled at the irony. For years, she'd begged emotionally to be seen. Now that she finally saw herself clearly, he noticed. Too late. Thank you. Dale shoved his hands into his coat pockets and looked toward the windows. I wasn't sure you'd let me in. I almost didn't. He nodded slightly, like he deserved that. Because he did. For a while, neither spoke. Then finally, Dale exhaled heavily. I made mistakes. Selma looked at him carefully. Mistakes? Interesting word. Affairs were mistakes. Forgetting anniversaries were mistakes. Years of manipulation required intention. You built an entire second life behind my back, she said softly. That's not a mistake, Dale. He closed his eyes briefly. I know. No defensiveness. No anger. That unsettled her more than shouting would have. Dale moved slowly toward the windows overlooking the river. Everything fell apart so fast. There it was again. Not grief for her. Grief for collapse. Selma leaned lightly against the kitchen island. You mean the company? He looked back at her sharply. No. A pause. Us. The answer caught her off guard, because for the first time since this began, he sounded sincere. And sincerity from someone who hurt you deeply was dangerous. Not because it erased the damage, because it awakened old hope instinctively. Selma stayed very still emotionally. Careful. Dale walked closer again. I know you probably think I never loved you. Selma looked at him quietly. I think you loved how I made you feel. That hurt him visibly. Good, because it was true. Dale swallowed hard. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and you spent years making sure I felt small enough not to notice. Silence. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Dale rubbed both hands across his face tiredly. I don't even recognize myself anymore. Selma almost laughed sadly. She understood that feeling better than he did, because she had spent years losing herself while he benefited from it. You know what's strange? She asked softly. Dale looked up. I kept waiting for you to become kinder once you succeeded. A painful little smile crossed her face. But the more powerful you became, the less human you treated me. Dale's expression tightened. I was under pressure. You were under worship. That sentence cut straight through him. Selma saw it happen, because that was the truth nobody around Dale ever forced him to confront. He didn't become addicted to money. He became addicted to superiority, to admiration, to being the smartest man in every room, and eventually, her intelligence became inconvenient to that fantasy. Dale sat heavily on the couch and stared at the floor. I thought if I kept winning, he said quietly, everything would finally feel stable. Selma studied him silently. And did it? A long pause. Then finally, no. There it was. The emptiness underneath all of it. The affair, the money, the arrogance, the control. None of it actually fixed whatever broken thing lived inside him. And somehow, that realization made Selma feel more sad than angry. Dale looked up slowly. When did you stop loving me? The question hung painfully in the room. Selma thought about it honestly. The answer wasn't simple. I don't think love disappears suddenly, she said quietly. Dale stayed silent. I think it dies from starvation. His face tightened immediately. Selma continued softly. Every time you dismissed me. A pause. Every time you made me feel irrational for noticing something. Another pause. Every time I abandoned myself to keep the peace. Tears burned unexpectedly behind her eyes now. I loved you so much, Dale. Her voice cracked. And somehow that became permission for you to hurt me safely. Dale looked devastated. Really devastated. Not performative, not polished. For the first time since she met him, he looked emotionally naked. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Selma closed her eyes briefly. God, how many nights had she needed that apology? How many years? But timing mattered, and apologies arriving after consequences rarely healed what caused them. "You know what hurts most?" Dale asked suddenly. Selma looked at him carefully. "You don't need me anymore." The honesty stunned her, because underneath all his manipulation, there it was, the real fear. Not losing control of the company, not losing money, losing relevance inside her life. Selma sat slowly across from him. "I needed you for years," she said softly. "You just confused needing with loving." Dale stared at her silently, and now Selma looked toward the rain beyond the windows. Now. The word carried enormous weight. Now she could breathe again. Now she trusted her own thoughts. Now she no longer apologized for taking up emotional space. Now she finally understood self-respect wasn't cruelty. It was survival. She looked back at him gently. "Now I need peace more than I need us." The sentence shattered something inside him. She saw it clearly. Dale lowered his head briefly, then laughed once under his breath. Bitter. Defeated. "I spent so much time trying to make sure you'd never leave," he murmured. Selma swallowed hard, and in the process, she said softly, "You made sure there was nothing safe left to stay for." Silence filled the apartment again. Heavy, final. After a while, Dale stood slowly. "I saw the press release today," he said quietly. Selma frowned slightly. "Naomi Brooks's new venture." "Ah." She nodded once. Naomi had officially backed Selma's consulting firm that morning. Matthews Strategic Advisory. Not named after Dale. Named after her. Her future. Her mind. Dale smiled faintly through visible heartbreak. "You're really doing it." For the first time in years, Selma smiled without sadness attached to it. "Yes." Dale stared at her for a long moment, and finally understood the most painful truth of all. She wasn't becoming powerful because she destroyed him. She was becoming powerful because she stopped abandoning herself for him. He walked toward the door slowly, then paused. "Selma," she looked up. "You were never difficult to love." Her throat tightened painfully. Dale's eyes filled with quiet regret. "I was just too selfish to love you properly." And somehow, that was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. 6 months later, Selma Matthews no longer flinched when people said her name in boardrooms. That surprised her more than anyone. The offices of Matthews Strategic Advisory occupied the top 2 floors of a renovated Manhattan building overlooking the Hudson River. Warm lighting, glass walls, clean modern design softened by bookshelves, fresh flowers, and quiet jazz drifting through the reception area. It looked powerful without trying to intimidate anyone. Very unlike Harrow Capital. Selma had built it that way intentionally. No fear-based culture, no worship, no pretending exhaustion was ambition. The first few months had been brutal. Not financially, emotionally. Healing while rebuilding a career felt like learning how to walk after years spent convincing yourself you deserved to crawl. There were mornings she still woke up, panicked from dreams about Dale. Moments when guilt returned unexpectedly. Moments when loneliness hit hard enough to steal the air from her lungs. But slowly, the panic stopped lasting so long. Then eventually, it stopped controlling her at all. Ms. Matthews Selma looked up from her office desk. Her assistant Clara stood hesitantly near the doorway. "There's someone asking to speak with you." Selma glanced toward the clock. Did she have an appointment? No. Clara lowered her voice slightly. "But I think she really needs help." Selma hesitated briefly, then nodded. "Send her in." A young woman entered moments later looking visibly overwhelmed. Mid-20s maybe. Nervous posture. Mascara smudged beneath tired eyes. Selma recognized the expression instantly. The look of someone apologizing for existing before they even speak. "My name's Emily," the woman said softly. I'm sorry for showing up unannounced. Selma gestured gently toward the chair across from her desk. You don't need to apologize for needing something. Emily looked startled by the sentence. Interesting. Selma remembered that feeling too. The shock of encountering kindness without punishment attached to it. Emily sat carefully. I saw your interview last month, she admitted quietly, about financial coercion and emotional manipulation. Selma leaned back slightly. The interview had gone viral unexpectedly. Millions of women resonated with parts of her story, even without knowing every detail. Emily twisted her fingers together nervously. My husband handles all our finances, she whispered. And lately, her voice cracked. I don't think I understand what's happening anymore. Selma felt something painful move through her chest. Not pity, recognition. Emily continued quietly. He tells me I'm overreacting whenever I ask questions. There it was, the sentence. The beginning of psychological disappearance. Selma stayed very calm externally. What made you come here today? Emily stared down at her hands. I think I needed proof that women survive this. The honesty nearly broke Selma's heart, because once upon a time, she needed that proof too. Selma walked slowly around the desk and sat beside her instead of across from her. You are not crazy, she said gently. Emily started crying immediately. Not dramatic sobbing, the exhausted kind, the kind that happens when someone finally stops carrying confusion alone. Selma handed her tissues quietly and suddenly understood something enormous. This. This was the real reason she survived everything. Not revenge, not victory, not even justice. To become the woman she once desperately needed herself. Later that evening, Selma stood inside the conference room, reviewing expansion proposals with Naomi Brooks. Naomi closed one file and studied her carefully. You're different lately. Selma smiled faintly, hopefully in a good way, in a peaceful way. That word still felt unfamiliar sometimes. Peace. For years, Selma confused peace with silence. Now she understood real peace required honesty first. Naomi leaned back in her chair. You know half of Manhattan expected you to become ruthless after the divorce. Selma laughed softly. I considered it briefly. And Selma looked out toward the glowing skyline. I spent too many years around people who treated power like permission to hurt others. She smiled slightly. I don't want to become another version of that. Naomi watched her with visible respect. You already won, Selma. The sentence lingered after Naomi left. Had she? For a long time, Selma thought winning meant watching Dale lose everything. But healing changed her understanding of victory entirely. Because real victory wasn't revenge. It was no longer needing revenge to feel whole. That night, Selma attended a private charity gala downtown. Not because appearances required it, because she genuinely wanted to support the foundation. That still felt new, too. Doing things without performance attached. The ballroom buzzed softly with conversation, while live piano music floated through candlelight. And then, she saw him. Dale stood near the far side of the room, speaking quietly with another guest. Simpler suit now, less polished confidence. No crowd orbiting him anymore. For one strange second, old memories hit her hard. The early years, the apartment floor, the dreams they once built together before ego poisoned them both. Dale noticed her almost immediately. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and something unexpected happened. Selma felt no anger, no longing, no fear, just distance. Healthy distance. Dale approached slowly after excusing himself from the conversation. You look happy, he said quietly. Selma considered the statement honestly. I think I'm becoming someone I recognize again. Dale smiled sadly. I read your interview. That brave of you. He laughed softly under his breath. I deserve that. Silence settled gently between them. Not hostile anymore, just finished. Dale glanced around the ballroom. You built something good. Selma nodded once. So did you once. The sadness in his eyes deepened, because they both understood what she really meant. Harrow Capital could have been meaningful once, before ego consumed it, before control replaced intimacy. Dale looked at her carefully. You know what finally destroyed me? Selma raised an eyebrow slightly. I realized you never wanted revenge. He smiled bitterly. You just wanted your life back. That truth hit harder than any scandal ever had, because it exposed how deeply he misunderstood love for years. Selma looked at him quietly. I did love you, Dale. I know, but I love myself now too. The sentence settled between them like closure. Real closure. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Human. Dale nodded slowly, then finally stepped back. I hope someone loves you properly someday, he said softly. Selma smiled gently. I hope you learn how to love someone without needing them smaller than you. His expression cracked slightly, because deep down, he knew that was the real tragedy of his life. Not losing money, not losing status, losing the ability to love without control attached to it. Later that night, Selma returned to her office alone. The city glowed beyond the windows, while soft jazz played faintly through the empty building. She walked slowly through the quiet halls of the company she built herself. Not stolen, not manipulated, earned. At the end of the hallway, she paused outside her office doors, then smiled softly to herself. Not because she destroyed a man who underestimated her, but because she finally stopped underestimating herself. And for the first time in years, that was enough. Selma's story is not really about revenge, it is about recognition. The painful kind. The kind that arrives late after years of silence have already reshaped a person into someone they no longer recognize in the mirror. What Dale never understood was that breaking someone slowly doesn't make it less destructive. It just makes the damage harder to name. Selma didn't become strong the moment she fought back. She became strong the moment she stopped negotiating her own worth. There is a quiet truth hidden inside stories. Like hers, people don't usually leave when they stop loving someone, they leave when they finally stop abandoning themselves. Selma stayed not because she was weak, but because she was conditioned to believe love required self-erasure. And that is what makes emotional manipulation so dangerous. It doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like comfort, protection, even love, until one day you realize you've been living a life where your voice only exists when it doesn't disturb someone else's ego. But healing is not loud. It doesn't come with applause or instant closure. It comes in small, almost invisible moments, like the first time Selma said no without explaining herself, or the first time she didn't apologize for taking up space in a room she helped build. It comes when silence no longer feels like safety, but like suffocation. And it comes when you finally understand that being kind does not mean being available for harm. Selma's greatest victory was not watching Dale lose everything. It was realizing she no longer needed his downfall to feel whole. That is the shift most people miss. Real power is not in destruction, it is in detachment, in choosing peace even when you could choose chaos, in walking away without needing to be understood. If you are watching this story and seeing pieces of yourself in it, remember this: you are not too much for wanting respect. You are not difficult for wanting honesty. And you are never wrong for outgrowing a version of love that required you to disappear. Selma did not become free because someone saved her. She became free because she finally stopped betraying herself. If this story moved you in any way, share your thoughts in the comments below. I would really love to know what part resonated with you the most. And if you enjoy emotional storytelling like this, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about love, betrayal, healing, and self-worth.